Ancient Art and Midrash, an exploration in ancient synagogue art and Genesis Rabbah. You can view my source sheet and follow along at the link right there. What are we exploring? My idea for this project was to try and uncover the relationship between Midrashim and the communities of two ancient synagogues, Dura Europos and Beit Alpha. Both synagogues have beautifully preserved artwork, so that's why I chose to focus there. Also, both synagogues have depictions of the Akedah, or the binding of Isaac story, found in Genesis 22. Through a close analysis of each piece of art, I wanted to know if I could find any connections to rabbinic Agadic Midrashim. The results of this exploration could then point me towards understanding what type of relationship the communities of Dura Europos and Beit Alpha had to rabbinic literature, perhaps what role the rabbis played in the synagogues, and how far rabbinic literature reached during the post-Second Temple times. My hypothesis was when I began researching this project, that yes, there was some type of relationship between the communities of Beit Alpha and Dura Europos and rabbinic literature. And I was hoping to see some of that connection in the artwork of both of these synagogues. So I'm going to take us through what my research was, and I'm going to show whether I proved my hypothesis right or my hypothesis wrong. Okay, we're going to start at Dura Europos, which is right there in the yellow circle. Dura Europos was a city with a synagogue that was established in 245 CE, the synagogue inside of the city. The city was located in what is now Syria. The city was on the border of the Roman Empire and the Sasanian Persians, and it exchanged hands a number of times. But because Dura Europa was a border town, we can see influences from both the Roman Empire and the Sasanian Persian Empire reflected in its synagogue's art. All right, as you can see, detailed, colorful artwork was miraculously preserved inside of the synagogue. These are pictures of the synagogue's western wall, and in the middle of the wall is an alcove where the Torah was thought to sit. Okay, the Akedah painting is located on the upper right-hand corner of the lintel above the Torah ark. To the left of it, there is a depiction of a temple presumed to be the second temple, and to the left of that is a depiction of a menorah, a lulav, and an etrog, items that were used in and associated with the temple. Taking you through the Akedah painting from bottom to top, we see a ram hiding behind a bush at the bottom of the panel. A figure, probably Abraham, is holding a spear. To his left is an altar with the sharp point on it, and another figure, Isaac, laying on top of it with his face turned away from us and bound. In the corner is a tent with an opening, and yet another figure standing in the doorway who is thought to be Sarah, with her back turned towards us. To the left of the tent is an outstretched right hand thought to be belonging to God. Okay, next is Beit Alpha. Beit Alpha is a 6th century synagogue located in northern Israel in the Galilee region. It also holds beautifully preserved artwork in the form of mosaics that were found on the floor of the synagogue. The mosaic of the Akedah is found near where the door would be, so that anyone who entered was confronted by the scene. Walking from here forward, visitors crossed a large mosaic zodiac, which we analyzed in class, and is very interesting, but we're not going to focus on it right now. Past the zodiac, even further in, is a panel depicting an ark, menorahs, lulav, and etrog, among other things. The depiction of the Akedah scene from left to right, we see two figures with a donkey, which are likely Abraham's two servants. A ram is seen hidden behind a bush, or maybe hanging on a bush, or maybe his horns are caught in the thicket. The Hebrew inscription above the ram reads, Vehine ayal, behold a ram. Above the bush is a depiction of a hand emerging from a dark orb, heaven, I don't know. The hand presumably belongs to God, pointing towards a figure labeled as Abraham. Another inscription under the hand reads, Al Tishlach, do not raise, which is definitely referring to Abraham's own hand. Abraham is seen holding a spear and lifting another smaller figure labeled as Isaac over a flaming altar. Isaac's wrists are bound together. What I noticed about each of these images is the presence of Abraham and Isaac, first off. Both scenes have a ram that is prominent, a large altar, and a hand emerging from the sky. Both images also have other figures besides Abraham and Isaac. In the Dura Europa's image, we have presumably Sarah at the entrance of a tent that is concluding the scene, and in the Beit Alpha image, Abraham's 2 servants and his donkey are setting up the scene. Both of the artists at Dura Europa's and Beit Alpha decided to depict the same image of the Akedah story, a moment of tension, suspension, and faith. Abraham builds an altar and lays Isaac on it. An angel tells Abraham to lower his hand, and suddenly Abraham sees a ram and replaces it with his son, which is the section here in Genesis 22, 9 through 13. Okay, Genesis Rabbah, WTF is going on in this story. So the Midrash on the Akedah is spread out over many, many bodies of work, but I chose to focus on Genesis Rabbah, an Amoraic work that dates to around the same time as both of the synagogues I focused on. It's possible that later Midrashim contain Aggadic material on the Akedah that actually does date to this time that I'm talking about, but individual stories are pretty much impossible to historically date outside of the context of their published work. So I'm not going to try to attempt to date later Midrashim. Okay, but I did find a lot of stuff in Genesis Rabbah, and it seems that the rabbis are very concerned with trying to make sense of the biblical narrative. How is it that Abraham was about to sacrifice his own son? What was going on through his head? Why did Isaac go along with it? Did Isaac know what was going to happen? It's kind of like the Midrashim deals with questions like this. I'm going to share 3 actually Midrashim that support this idea. Now, there's no way to know if specific Midrashim were popular or well known during the 3rd through 6th century CE, or if there were other Midrashim that were floating around that weren't codified or recorded. So knowing that, the 3 Midrashim that I'm going to reference may or may not have been relevant to the communities of Dura Europas or Beit Alpha. All right, Genesis Rabbah 56:7. And he said, do not lay your hand. Where was the knife? 3 tears had fallen from the angels of service, and the knife dissolved. Abraham said, I will strangle him. He said, do not lay your hand upon the lad. Abraham said, I will take a drop of blood from him. He said to him, inflict no blemish upon him. In this Midrash, we can see that there is more to the story when God commands Abraham not to raise his hand. Abraham's knife dissolves, so Abraham resorts to sacrificing Isaac with his own hands, or he's about to. God again tells Abraham to lower his hand and to inflict no blemish on him. Perhaps this Midrash is trying to answer the question of how could Abraham do such an act? The rabbis here show us how pious Abraham was, how strong his faith was for God, that he was willing to complete God's commandment even if it meant using his own hands. This account is inconsistent with the 2 artistic representations of the Akedah that we just looked at. In both pieces, Abraham can be seen holding a spear, and his hands are given no special highlight. More so, there is no representation of angels nor their tears. Finally, although a ram can be seen in both the Dura Europas and Beit Alpha scenes, there is no indication that in either of them, Abraham backs away from his task or is sacrificing. There's no indication in either of the scenes that Abraham backs away from his task of sacrificing Isaac. Isaac remains on the altar in both scenes, with Abraham approaching, presumably ready to do the act. Okay. Next piece of Midrash from Genesis Rabbah 56:8. Abraham became surprised and said, these words are confusing. Yesterday you said, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be called for you. Then you went back and said, take your son. And now your angel says to me, do not lay your hand upon the lad. I am bewildered. The Holy One, blessed be he, responded, Abraham, I will not violate my covenant or change what I have uttered. When I said to you, take your son, I never said to slaughter him. I merely said to raise him up. And I said this to you to demonstrate your belovedness, and you did my bidding. Now take him down. This Midrash is trying to answer the question, how could God ask Abraham to sacrifice his own son? The rabbis answer by stating that God didn't actually ask Abraham to do that. God merely asked him to raise him up. Similar to our last Midrash, our two artistic scenes show no indication that Abraham was hesitant or backing away from his task of sacrificing Isaac. In the Dura Europa scene, Isaac remains in the altar, not taken down. And in the Beit Alpha scene, Abraham is actively throwing Isaac onto the flaming altar. All right, my last piece of Midrash from Genesis Rabbah 56:8. Rabbi Yitzchak said, at the time that Abraham sought to bind Yitzchak his son, he said to him, Father, I am a young man, and I am concerned lest my body shake from fear of the knife, and I will trouble you, and lest the slaughtering will be invalid, and it will not be considered a sacrifice for you. Rather, tie me up very well. Immediately he bound Isaac. Could he really tie up a man of 37 years? Rather, it was with his agreement. This Midrash is answering the question of, did Isaac know what was going to happen to him? And was he complicit? Isaac and Abraham have a conversation in which Isaac is fully aware of what God has asked of his father. More importantly, however, is the mention of Isaac being 37 years old. In the Dura Europa scene, Isaac's age is ambiguous. But in the Beit Alpha scene, Isaac is clearly a child. He is quite small, which is inconsistent with this Midrash. So, from what we analyze from the artistic works of Beit Alpha and Dura Europa, what can we learn from the Midrashim in Genesis Rabbah? From what we learn from both, do these two have any relationship at all? I would safely bet no, there isn't an obvious relationship between the two, which is disproving my initial hypothesis from the beginning of the presentation. In addition to the inconsistencies I mentioned already, I noticed some other trends when exploring this topic. The artwork in climax of the story versus a whole journey. The artwork in the ancient synagogues depict the climax of the Akedah story, Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, with a ram hanging in the background. The Midrashim and Genesis Rabbah comment on the entire story. 2. Depiction of Sarah. It is striking and worth mentioning that Sarah is included in the Dura Europa scene. The Midrashim are not so concerned with Sarah, as she is rarely mentioned in any Midrashim that I looked at. 3. Proximity to the temple and ritual objects. Nowhere in the Midrashim that talk about the Akedah that I found did the rabbis draw any connections to the temple. The temple was absent from all of their discussions, but both scenes in the ancient synagogues are located in close proximity to the depictions of the temple and to ritual objects, signifying a strong connection between the two. What does this mean? Because I wasn't able to find many connections between the art at Dura Europos and Beit Alpha and the Midrashim in Genesis Rabbah, this suggests that the Midrashim on the Akedah either didn't reach these synagogues or that the rabbis and rabbinic literature didn't hold much influence on these ancient communities. The communities, perhaps, were not in conversation with each other and remained distinct. Perhaps the rabbis had no significant role in the synagogues. However, I hesitate to say such a blanket statement because through my research, we're only getting a small glimpse of what the reality was or could have been. I understand that my conclusions have limitations. First, that artwork is only able to capture a snapshot, which can then be interpreted in a myriad of ways, while words and writing can capture a much wider breadth with less room for interpretation. I was also looking at only one biblical story and one piece of artwork from each synagogue and one area in Genesis Rabbah, a very small little window. One can make the claim that perhaps there is overlap between ancient synagogue artworks and other midrashim that I just haven't uncovered. Okay. Thank you so much for taking this tour with me. I hope that you learned something because I definitely did. And sorry I talked really fast, but this is my allotted time. Okay, bye.